All right.
You do?
Let's see, I'll just call it 1 o'clock. So I'm calling the March 3rd, 2025 meeting of the Albemarle County Architectural Review Board to order. Could you call the roll, please?
Sure. Mr. Henningsen,
Here.
Mr. Hancock,
Here.
Mr. Stoner,
Here.
Mr. Mitsuno,
Here.
Mr. Vanderwerf.
Here.
Thank you.
Thanks. Today's meeting is a hybrid meeting. The public may access and participate in the meeting electronically. Instructions for doing so are posted on the Albemarle County website at the Albemarle County calendar. The public has real-time audiovisual access to this meeting over Zoom and real-time audio access over telephone. Both is provided in the lawfully posted meeting notice. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the county's website. This meeting is a public record and subject to disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act. All speakers, when it is your turn to speak, please first state your name for the record. Applicants who are making presentations, note that your presentation is limited to a total of 15 minutes, which you can divide among your team members. Staff will let us know when the 15 minutes are up. If applicants in the meeting room have team members attending virtually who will need to present, please make that known when you come to the podium. Everyone who is participating virtually, please mute your microphone until it is your turn to speak. Do any ARB members have anything to disclose?
Yes.
No.
We have to tell you what it is.
Well, yeah, I get that.
I will have to recuse myself from the,
Here, you need to- I can't hear him.
sorry, I will have to recuse myself from the Barnes lumber discussion.
All right.
And I also won't be participating in the Barnes Lumber discussion.
All right. And I have a shocking disclosure of my own, which is if we have not concluded naturally by 3 o'clock, I will have to leave at that time. So let's see. Are there any members of the public that want to make a comment about a project that is not on the agenda for review?
No, sir.
All right. There is one consent agenda item today, which is ARB 2024-02 Botanical Garden. Does any ARB member want to move the Botanical Garden application off the consent agenda? No.
No.
All right. Sounds good. So in that case, I move to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second that.
All right, if we could put that to a vote.
Seconded.
Oh, Dade.
Date, okay. All right, Mr. Vanderwerf,
Aye.
Mr. Matsuno,
Aye.
Mr. Stoner,
Aye.
Mr. Hancock,
Aye.
Mr. Henningsen.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. We have one regular review item today, which is ARB 2023-107 Barnes Lumber.
Great. This is a proposal to establish design criteria for future applications for development of the Barnes lumber property. Once the ARB approves design criteria for this overall development, individual development proposals are then eligible for staff level review. And that's under the public-private partnership category of the countywide certificates of appropriateness. You may recall you had a work session on this proposal in January of last year. And since that time, staff have been working with the applicant to refine the criteria. Just as a reminder, the site of the proposed development lies in the heart of Crozet. It's generally located south of Three Notched Road and the railroad tracks, west and north of houses along Hilltop Street, and east of Crozet Avenue and Oak Street. The proposed criteria are organized around the views of the site that are available from the entrance corridor. Primary views of the site are from Three Notched Road across the railroad tracks. And the topography changes along the site such that the site sits below the railroad tracks at the east end and the site is more level with the tracks at the west end. With that topography, the applicant has presented this map that shows what development is expected to be visible and the areas where development below 2 stories in height will not likely be visible. The applicant proposes a block pattern and visual connections as the means of establishing an organized development as viewed from the entrance corridor. 3 visual connections are shown. The submittal does indicate that the easternmost won't be visible from the entrance corridor. I think the applicant will, is ready to give you a little more information on that point. The visual connections are tree-lined views into the development. They're intended to emphasize the urban character of the development, to prevent overly long and uninterrupted facades along the corridor, and to provide glimpses into the development beyond the corridor. The connections draw on existing patterns of views that open into existing properties along the corridor and rows of trees aligned perpendicular to the street. A question that we have identified for the ARB for discussion is whether those visual connections are sufficient to establish a coordinated and appropriate appearance along the corridor. The applicant also proposes trees parallel to the tracks for the western portion of the frontage. The submittal states that the railroad embankment will screen trees along the eastern portion of that frontage, but given the mature height of large shade trees, it's anticipated that trees planted along the eastern portion would be visible from the corridor. So we've recommended that the criteria be revised to provide trees parallel to the tracks along the full frontage of the development, but still allowing those breaks for the visual connections. We've also suggested that the depth of the tree and fence buffer be increased from 5 feet to 10 feet, and we've recommended some additional notes to clarify the fence design. The proposed criteria address the appearance of buildings and ARB comments from the previous review with requirements addressing the depth of recesses and projections, changes in detailing, material limitations, and limits on wall-mounted lighting styles. The proposal states that repurposed industrial equipment may be appropriate for this area. It also proposes to exempt a number of items from entrance corridor review. Those include seasonal shade devices, umbrellas, tents, temporary canopies, food trucks, temporary structures, and murals occupying less than 20% of the area of a facade visible from the entrance corridor. We have made recommendations on each of those items. We've recommended that tents intended for permanent outdoor activities should be subject to review and approval, that mobile food vendors will comply with all relevant county policies, that temporary structures that do not require plans or permits would not be subject to entrance corridor review. And we've recommended additional criteria to limit the use of murals and to ensure appropriate appearances for repurposed industrial-related elements. The applicant's submittal includes a table that outlines the proposed criteria. A few of those items would require changes to be consistent with our recommendations. Our recommendation is for approval with those changes listed in the staff report, and we have identified there's 3 points of a discussion for you related to view corridors, murals, and temporary features, and I would be happy to try to answer any of your questions.
All right, thanks a lot for that presentation, Margaret. I guess we'll start with Dade if you have any questions.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for your report, Margaret. Thanks for also flashing the diagram about the height to length ratio. Does that regulate building plane or just material?
Which
Sorry, the next one, that one, can you remind me in terms of the 2 times height limit for the building that's reflected there, is that a material limitation that the material would have to change, or does there need to be a change in plane or other mass at that point?
it would be, you know what, let me just, let me pull up the criteria so I get it right. Too many words on the page. I'm going to go from memory and I will let the applicant
Okay,
correct me.
Sure thing. Yeah.
It would be 2, it would have to be at least 2 of the 3 features that were listed in there, either the material change or projection or recessing or some of those other elements.
Okay.
And I will try to pull that up, the detail
Okay.
for you.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
No other questions.
Great, thanks. Frank?
Sure. Thanks, Margaret. Just curious, does this lock in the plan where it shows the building and parking? And it seems more diagrammatic. Is there anything keeping the applicant from putting a building where the parking is and vice versa, or is it,
That could change. Yeah.
that could change?
Mhm.
Okay. I don't have any other questions.
All right, thanks. I don't have any questions, so if the applicant has a presentation.
Thanks, everyone. I'm Kurt Kiesecker with BRW Architects. And I'm gonna see if I can open the PDF real fast. I didn't ask how to share it on the screen. Do I just open it? I'm sorry. Sorry.
It's not intuitive. You're fine.
Thank you. Thank you for your report and comments. We are generally agreeable with everything that's been recommended. There are a couple of items, though, we'd like to speak with you about and also clarify as it relates to the number of visual connections and this discrepancy between 2 and 3. The items that we would like to talk about relate mostly to the trees on the north property line and the width of the fence zone allowed for the trees. And then one small clarification on item number 8, which is add design criteria to ensure appropriate appearances for repurposed industrial lumber and other material, lumberyard and railroad materials. Can I just go in order from the top of the list and describe what we're thinking? So on the question of the number of visual connections and while there's some confusion, we would like to have 3 visual connections in the final site plan to kind of emphasize the block pattern on that portion of the site. And the one in question is the one to the eastern portion of the image that's on the screen now. That level of the site is slightly below the embankment of the railroad tracks. And so we thought it was a little bit strange to call it a visual connection because most people on the ground in our property and on the other side of the embankment at a person's level would not have a connection through into the site like the other two, where the entrance corridor and the site are on more of the similar level. But in terms of the tree planting and that pattern, we wanted to go ahead and replicate it again. And I've got some sections in this slideshow that would illustrate that a little bit. I'll just go to the next page. So the section that we're talking about is section number 1. And in these drawings, the small scale building on the left of the drawing at the bottom left-hand corner, the zoning ordinance asks for 2 stories in height up to 4 stories, and then you can go up to 6 with a special exception. And typically we've shown 4-story buildings over on the right-hand side of the sections. And so that little tiny person with the view radiating out is a person at scale. And then just to their right is the size of a car within the entrance corridor itself. You can also see where the railroad tracks are placed. And so moving from section number 0, which is an intersection far to the east that we're not recommending any visual connection, and then moving to item number 1 or section number 1, you can see that the individual's gaze would be kind of directed slightly skyward because of the embankment. And at 2 and 3, you're on more level. And so that's really a true visual connection you can see into the site with that tree lined. The reason we'd like to have 3 visual connections is 3s are better for kind of providing that emphasis on the block pattern, we believe. And it also helps to steer or shade or conceal some oblique views as one drives east and west on 250. And so we think 3 is better, and we're happy to provide 3. Any questions on that one before I move to the next 2?
I guess, Dave, do you have any questions?
I guess, yeah, if you could clarify, I wasn't sure if I heard you correctly. Is the intent to still provide the trees, but not the view corridor at the 4th connection, or that would not have any of the elements of the others?
It would not have any of the elements of the other, and I'll just go ahead and, but you can see it from this one, but the embankment is so high and the slope moving east on the property is so great that we feel like that location is best left flexible for, you know, it wouldn't, in plan, it would look good, but we're not sure in terms of experience, it would kind of accomplish the same desire that we have. So the image at the top shows all of the different possible configurations of buildings on either sides of the street, you know, within the property. We've kind of identified these different zones on the property of the north lots, and then build out kind of along the main street area, on Main Street in parentheses, it's not called that, but the main, you know, focal street. And then properties in the future that will be further removed. And as you can see, as the property falls away, and particularly in section number 0, that the embankment of the railroad tracks and its impact on that portion of the site, it's harder to see anything down there. So we wanted to leave the development team more flexibility for the development of that end of the property to serve needs in the community a little bit better. Happy to answer any more questions is that okay?
Yeah, thank you for the answer.
All right, Frank, do you have any?
Yes, if you don't have the, I guess, the street at section 0, could you put a building there? Would that be the hope? Or
It could
the-
be,
yeah.
a building, yeah.
I mean, I think you've got enough of the cut throughs that I think it'd be more valuable to have a building there.
That was the thought, and some flexibility for not knowing how the future development on that end of the site was going to occur. So it was
Yeah.
the least visible portion of the site. So we were just trying to maximize flexibility, I think is the fairest.
Yeah.
The building, as it's visible from the corridor, would still have to abide by our regular stipulations in our proposal, and as well as entrance corridor guidelines in general. So just trying to leave them flexibility of plan there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I don't have any questions about that aspect, so if you want to move on to the next.
Okay. Things on the screen won't be as helpful for addressing the next 2 items, but they generally relate to trees along the north property line. And as we talked about before, a year ago, I don't remember the last time we were here. It's an odd situation for the entrance corridor to be separated from our property with the active railroad line. And the street trees typically would be closer to the entrance corridor. So ideally, the street trees and kind of that corridor consistency would be near 250, near 240 on property we don't control. And so we're trying to allow folks to be able to see into the property to kind of enjoy its animated urban build out as time goes on, and not necessarily screen it because of the distance across the tracks to the north property line. So our thought was, with the visual connection tree planting as site plans evolve, that will give some green edge and follow some patterns that are typical of the development along 240, where trees follow the property lines between different businesses, but it doesn't adhere to the strict guidelines for the entrance corridor, where street trees should be adjacent to the property. And that's part of the reason why we wanted to bring these proposals forward, is to provide clarity for you and for us as development moves forward. So the 5-foot buffer that we've shown for tree planting and the 10-foot recommendation also kind of speaks to that issue, where we're hoping that the buildings themselves will be the emphasis, and the trees along that north property line will be less emphasized. We're expecting beautiful buildings. So to the question of whether or not the trees would continue along the entirety of this property to its easternmost edge, in our diagram and the other image that Ms. Malashevsky showed previously, I'll try to pull it up real fast from the actual booklet.
Kurt, sorry to interject a follow-up question. The diagram seems to illustrate 2- or 3-story building massing. Is that the correct limitation of the development, or is it 4 or 6 as appears in the diagram at the?
The scale image of the image that I showed is a little bit deceiving, because we put a line where there's 2 stories, and 4, the zoning, I think, requires 2 minimum and up to 4 by right in the downtown Crozet district. And so it looks like that's a two-story building and a three-story building, but it's actually 2, 4, and 6. Each of those represents 2 levels.
2 levels. And so the development could be 6 stories in height next to,
Only with a
240.
special exception through
Okay.
the rezone, the zoning
okay, but
process.
4 stories by right.
That's right.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you.
And that's represented by the top of the gray box in each of these images.
Thank you.
Even though there's only one white line below it, which is a little deceiving.
Each line is 2 stories,
Yes,
4 by right,
Yeah.
6 with special.
yes.
Thank you.
And so I'll try to switch back over to the tree image. So this embankment again, and the distance from the corridor begin to speak to the consistency of the trees along the northern property. And our thought was that at some point, those trees begin to yield less value and impede flexibility of development, especially in light of the embankment being in place. And so in that third block that from the left, we begin to kind of transition away from trees and let the embankment do what it's naturally doing, which is, you know, providing the street edge toward the entrance corridor. To your question, Mr. Hancock, about whether this plan represents and a diagram of how the build out will happen. Our hope was that when a block has a building that's adjacent to the property line, there would not be a fence. The tree would, or the building would act as on that fence line, and it would be a facade that meets the criteria. But if parking occurs on that side of the development facing the entrance corridor, we would ask for a fence and the tree line to kind of help buffer and shield the parking. So whether it happens on block A or B, still yet to be determined, but those are the kind of variables that would occur. And then when the embankment starts to shield all view of those developments, obviously the buildings would still be under review, but the fence and the trees yield less benefit when the embankment shields that view. That was our thinking. And related to item number 8, which was the add design criteria for the industrial repurposed lumberyard railroad materials, we think we could maybe simplify that by, instead of adding criteria that would be hard to value in the future, that if those items are permanent, they get reviewed like normal, and if they're temporary, they fall under that temporary exemption. It just cleans everything up. So essentially treat them like we would the tents or the other outdoor pieces in the future. Seems like that would be easier to manage for everybody. And that's all I brought for
All right.
today. Thank you.
Thanks. Does anybody have any follow-up or additional questions for the applicant?
No, I don't.
No.
All right, well, thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
Are there any members of the public that want to make a comment?
No, sir.
All right, in that case, the ARB will now go into discussion. I guess we'll start with Frank Hancock, if you have any comments.
Sure. Thank you for the presentation. Just have a few notes. I appreciate the applicant's willingness or focus on placemaking. And I think some of the things we're drilling down on really speak to trying to create a unique place or build on an energy that exists in Crozet. So I really appreciate that. And I think that comes through in the package. And just applaud the diagrams and the drawings, especially the new ones we saw today. I think they were new. Very helpful to understand a pretty tricky site, and at least the portions of it that are adjacent to the corridor. So appreciate all that. I'll just kind of speak to, I think, some of the items that we were looking at today, specifically that were in the staff report. I think the applicant's case for 3 visual connections versus the 4 or the ones further east makes a ton of sense to me. You know, at the end of the day too, I think this is an opportunity to have dense site with more buildings, and so I appreciate that we're not having those connections, maybe could give us more or bigger buildings on that side. Because I do think this is more, I mean, urban's not really the right word, but more headed in that direction. And then similarly, I think the idea of a buffer, you know, when you're thinking about this context, the buffers seem a little out of place here. I feel like so much space is taken up by the railroad tracks already, that I don't think it's necessary to expand that buffer for more plantings. I think, you know, this is a case where you build to the property line or build really close to the property line in order to get that density, which I think is what the underlying zoning is really getting at. So similarly, I agree with the applicant as far as adding street trees, you know, on the eastern portion that would be down below the embankment that really wouldn't function as street trees. In that case, I would lobby more for architecture. And I think that would have a higher and greater impact on our corridor than trees that would take a long time to see, see the tops of them. So.
All right,
That's all
well,
I have.
thanks. Dade?
Great. Well, like Frank, I appreciate the applicant's proposal. It's very thorough and thoughtful. Appreciate the presentation today. I think to speak to some of the elements in the staff report, while I think the applicants made a case for not having the other visual break, I am concerned that that might result in a block length of about 600 feet, and other than the modest changes in material and plane that would be required by the Code of Development, I think we could end up seeing a building extent that is very out of scale with the existing fabric in Crozet. And so I feel like the other blocks and the visual breaks that limit those potential developments to 300 feet are a reasonable control, and I'm concerned about not having one in what is effectively a 600-foot length. That if I misunderstand what a potential implication of leaving it out is, by all means would be interested to understand that. And I think similarly, I think what we're being asked to do here is to give a certificate of appropriateness so that these building designs can proceed without our review. And I think in that context, having a more consistent landscape edge and effectively a visual filter, I think for me at least is I would be more comfortable giving the license and the independence to the future development, knowing that there was that landscape element to mitigate. I certainly trust and respect the development team and the folks involved in this project. I know they've got the best interests of Crozet and the community at heart, but would like to see that consistent visual buffer as a way to help ensure some greater degree of continuity in the development without our oversight going forward. I think those are the two key issues of concern for me.
All right, thanks. Yeah, and for my part, I agree with the points that both of you brought up. I tend to agree with you, Dade, on the breaks, because I feel like even if you're not getting a direct sight line into like street level, you're still, even if it's just a matter of seeing like clear sky at the break points, it kind of helps to establish a rhythm. I think if increased density or height is needed, I mean, that certainly seems like the east end of the site seems like the place to do it. But I still think the breaks give you a reasonable, you know, length to you know, for development without being, you know, totally onerous. I guess I fall a little bit more in Frank's camp as far as the street trees. I do think that, you know, at a certain point, you're just not going to see them. I mean, seeing those diagrams, I was under the impression that it was one story, so I think that kind of reinforces the point that, you know, expecting a street tree to reach like 4-story level, you know, even if that happened, it would be like, you know, 50 years away, so so I'm more inclined to go with the applicant's request on that. But as far as the breaks, I kind of agree that it's helpful to have them. So I guess we could just take a look at the
Can I ask you a question? Is there anything in the, maybe this is a question for staff or the applicant? Anything that limits the facade length? Like in the underlying zoning or in the development code or anything is, or they could have a 600-foot long building right there?
There's nothing in the proposed criteria that would affect that, and I don't know of any other regulations that would. I don't know how likely it is.
Yeah. And there's precedent for long buildings around here. Music Today building's pretty long. Different building type, I think.
Yeah, yeah. There are certainly buildings 600 feet long in many places, but I think it strikes me as a length that is great, especially if it could be 4 or even 6 stories.
Yeah,
It's a vastly different scale than downtown Crozet, which obviously it is going to grow through this development. But I do think that the break and you know, as Chris said, daylight would mitigate what could be very massive. And I think, you know, Chris's point about the time it takes trees to grow is certainly accurate. I do think with the possibility of 4 and or 6-story masses, even if they don't ultimately reach the full height of the buildings that they're in front of, they are a scalar element that helps to mitigate that height and expanse, I think. And even if we don't get to see them reach their mature height, we hope future residents of Crozet may get to.
thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, so yeah, if we could take a look at the
Our recommendation was for approval with the conditions that were listed in the staff report. I've made a couple of changes here. If we jump down to number 8, was regarding the repurposed industrial elements based on the conversation, change that to permanent repurposed industrial, lumberyard, railroad, and rural elements are subject to review. I've struck through numbers 3 and 4. Those are related to the tree buffer and trees parallel to the tracks along the full frontage. Sounded like there was some agreement on not requiring those. And I've highlighted number 2, which still seems to be, not sure where you want to go with that one.
Yeah, we don't have a mechanism for line item votes, so we can't get the 2/3 majority.
Remind me, the applicant showed 3 or is there
I believe-
4 possible? Or 3 possible?
looked like there was 4
4 possible. I
4
think the applicant was
possible.
requesting
Yeah.
3. I think
Staff wants 2. Dade wants 4.
double or none, right?
Why was the 2 in the conditions? Was the applicant originally asking for only 2?
I think I misunderstood what was said in
Oh,
the
okay.
submittal. I thought that that it said, it's showing three there. And I
Okay.
thought the easternmost of those three was not going to be visible, but I think I've misunderstood that. So
So we're really talking about whether it's 3 or 4,
right.
right?
I think that's correct, yeah.
That's- Yeah. Mhm.
As I recall, those two easterly portions passed by the, are roughly 400 and 200 feet long, I think.
From the third all the way to the property line is
Is-
about 600
As
plus or
as I
minus.
recall from the diagrams in the booklet, but. And the others are, I think, each about 300 feet.
Mhm.
I guess in my opinion, it's set up like each one of those possible view card or locations is set up, you know, with a little traffic circle and everything. It seems like that would be natural to continue that, but I don't know that that's, I mean, particularly with the difference in height between the tracks and the site, I don't know that it would need to be required, but I think maybe like a consider the fourth location or um,
Could we ask the applicant if it's likely or could talk about future buildings and what the intent is? I mean, are we missing something?
It's perfectly fine to ask the applicant to come back up. I was also going to suggest that I don't know what the phasing of the project is. If you go ahead and require the fourth visual connection now, and as things begin to move along, the applicant can always come back and ask for a change later if there's, you know, more information as the construction begins that makes things more visible. Might be helpful.
That makes sense to me. I don't know that there are any plans for that end of the property that are solid enough to be able to anticipate what might unfold in the many years between now and then to know exactly what would happen. But I think there's some flexibility in this process for anything that doesn't reach the criteria that are outlined in our booklet to ask for a review from staff as a normal course. If I'm understanding the countywide process in general, if at any point you felt like it needed a review, or your staff felt like a more specific review was needed, it could be called to your attention. And so that might alleviate some concern in the future as things evolve.
Would that allay your concerns? So if we required the 4, now there'd be a venue for the applicant to request. I don't know if that would go so far as the trees as well. You'd be comfortable to require them in that context.
I think the trees are a little, I'm sorry, but do I get to speak?
Certainly, no.
The-
If the chair-
The trees are a little bit harder because of their, part of the desire in presenting these materials is to give a level of expectation to future applicants so they can know how to approach and what would generally be acceptable for future ARBs. Maybe not you guys, unless you just really love being on the ARB. And so I think the trees are a little bit more difficult in that sense because it does kind of begin to impact the planning that would occur for them. I think it's fair to assume that if there were a visual connection that were noted on the plan and a future up at location number 4 or 0, and someone came forward and said, we've got a plan for a building in that location that needs to straddle that line, that they would be able to present either that it's not visible because of the embankment, or its impact has merits. You know, there's a design element that could be forwarded to staff, and there would be a discussion about the elimination of that in the future if it were included in this package. I think maximum flexibility today is to leave it open, but if it were problematic, I think, you know, good design could prevail in the future, if that helps.
Thank you. And Chris, for the tree extent on the EC, would you be open to considering requiring it consistently between view corridors? I guess there are numbers 1 and 2 in the applicant's materials before. Like roughly where it stops between B and C in that diagram, if it instead, we asked for them to be continuous to the next view corridor. So there was a visual consistency and canopy between those two breaks.
That seems reasonable to me, because I mean, you're necessarily gonna have oblique views, you know, if you're driving or walking down 240. And so to me, that seems reasonable to extend it a little bit.
Do we have the building or the section through the site in this package, or are those new that the applicant showed? Is there one through, like,
Those are new, the sections we saw today are new ones from the
The-
applicant. Do you?
showed that embankment?
They're new. I made them this weekend. So let's see. See if I can do this time.
We're looking at number 1, really?
Number 0 is the one that is the easternmost, and 1 is the one
Right,
that is
yeah.
impeded by the embankment a little bit, but not dramatically. And in this drawing, I put a dash line at the feet of the person adjacent to the entrance corridor, just to get a sense of how things drop off, if that helps. So that's the dash line, but you can also see their little view angle.
And Kurt, for scale purposes, how tall are the stories represented in the diagrams?
Think we have them at either 10 or 12 feet. I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Okay, so roughly 20 to 24 feet for each 2-story block.
Mhm.
How tall is that senior living building? Existing building, that's pretty
The
tall, isn't it?
refrigeration.
Oh, in downtown, it's 6 or, yeah, I'm not sure, but well over,
6
yeah.
stories.
How wide's the railroad right away?
I don't know exactly, but 60, 70 feet, 75 feet, maybe. I'm not exactly sure. Scaling it, I didn't look at that before the meeting, but scaling that 100-foot by 100-foot box, I would say that it is 60 feet wide, give or take. Can you control this if I step away, or do I need to take it down when it's time? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a unique situation with the railroad there. And when we think of the trees, you know, you think of them right at the edge of the corridor.
Right.
And these are so internal and up against a building. At the bottom of a hill. I don't know. It just feels a little off to me, and I'm not gonna not vote on it to approve it, but I just feel like it. I don't know that it'll have that much of an impact on the corridor. And I'm expecting to see buildings here, like I wanna see.
Yeah.
I always say lonely buildings on the corridor. That's the senior living building is like the loneliest building out there. And so it is excited.
That's some company.
Friends. Coming here that are gonna be almost as tall.
That's right. That's right.
But I mean, I appreciate the applicant's like overall approach and like thinking about a place. And the place is internal.
Mhm.
We're at the disadvantage, like the corridor's in the wrong place. The heart of this is along that new road and building on the energy of the buildings that are there at the corner. But we don't get to really talk about that.
Yeah, I think I lean more towards Frank in this. As far as the tree aspect of the discussion, I kind of agree that the aside from the height of the berm, just the distance and fact that there's kind of somebody else's property that's kind of beyond our control and in the form of that railroad right of way. Kind of really complicates the situation, I think. Is cause to give them a little bit more leeway than I normally would if it was right up on the corridor.
Do we want to go back to the motion?
So item 2 would be changed to include 4 corridors. Is that correct for our discussion?
Right, does anybody feel like making a motion?
Sure, I'll move. I'll move for approval of the certificate of appropriateness for ARB 2023 107 Barnes Lumber with the conditions listed in the staff report amended as follows. Revise item number 2 to read, revise the proposal to include 4 view corridors. Strike items 3 and 4. Revise item 8 to read permanent, repurposed, industrial, lumberyard, railroad, and rural elements are subject to review.
All right, I'll second that. So if we could put that to a vote.
Mr. Henningsen,
Aye.
Mr. Hancock,
Aye.
Mr. Vanderwerf.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. All right, so we'll move to work sessions. We have one work session today, which is ARB 2024-71, 400 West Ryle Road.
Good afternoon, everybody. Recall on January 21st, the ARB completed advisory review of the concept plan for this SP. At that meeting, revisions to the plan were requested, which were to be considered by the ARB prior to plan commission review. After the meeting, design and zoning staff also provided some comments on the plan. On February 20th, staff received a revised concept plan. I'll start with comments from the ARB meeting, then move to staff comments. The concept plan has been revised to show that no items taller than an 8-foot fence height will be stored within 50 feet of the proposed fence line along Ryle Road, and the existing vegetation along the eastern and western perimeter of the site will remain. Regarding the third item, the applicant's response letter noted eliminating the Rio Road entrance was considered but was retained due to circulation and operation requirements. The 50-foot boundary from the fence line places material storage taller than the fence, nearly 100 feet from the entrance corridor. At this distance, the landscape berm is expected to sufficiently mitigate the visual impact on the entrance corridor. Next, I'll go through the comments provided by design and zoning staff. Comments number 1 through 4 in the memo were to address visibility of both proposed and existing non-conforming storage area. The visibility of both the proposed and existing non-conforming storage areas from the Rio Road entrance corridor. Filter views of the proposed storage area are expected through the existing vegetation along the western side of the site. Screening shrubs along this side of the storage area could help further reduce the visibility of the area from the entrance corridor. Regarding the non-conforming storage area at the rear of the site, zoning has requested that it be brought into conformity. The updated concept plan includes screening shrubs in a newly created planting area directly east of the building, and the fronting planting area east of the entrance to the employee parking lot. This landscaping is expected to help reduce visibility of the non-conforming storage area. However, this area will still be visible from the employee parking lot entrance. Screening shrubs along the fence line between the building and the employee parking lot are recommended to further reduce visibility of the area. The second comment in the memo noted the discrepancy of the boundaries of the storage area, which have been resolved in the updated plan. And the third comment sought to confirm the feasibility of the proposed plantings along the Rio Road frontage. The updated plan shows the plantings outside of rights of ways, easements, and site distance line. In the memo, our WSA project was referenced, but based on recently received plans, the project is not expected to impact site landscaping. Staff has recommended a couple of revisions to the concept plan that are to be made prior to a PC review. With following revisions and conditions, staff recommends no objection to the SP request. Recommendations for the site plan that were provided in the January 21st staff report have also been included as shown in the slide. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
All right, thanks a lot, Chris, for that presentation. Guess we'll start with Tara, if you have any questions.
No, but I appreciate you walking us through the various comments. It's very helpful. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Frank Stoner.
No, I don't have any comments. Thank you.
All right, Dade.
Thank you, Chris. No comments. Questions?
Frank.
One question, what does it mean to bring the blue or purple area into compliance, the non-conforming area? What does that mean?
Just bringing it into compliance because it's a non-conforming area in the sense that it's visible from the entrance corridor, and to bring it into compliance, it's either screening the visibility from the entrance corridor through fencing and or landscaping.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, I don't have any questions. So if the applicant has a presentation.
This is working slightly differently than normal, so bear with me. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I'm Valerie Long with the law firm of Williams Mullen. We are representing the applicant, which is B&D Holdings and its entity that now owns the land. My colleague Megan Nadostup is here with me today, and we do have a number of representatives participating virtually if needed, both from the applicant developer as well from Ferguson Waterworks. And I believe the landscape architects from Timmins Group are also available if needed. One piece of information that's new since we were here on January 21st is that we learned after we received a final Alta survey of the property that the area in blue is still owned by the state or Commonwealth. It was purchased from the phone company for the Western Bypass project, and many of the property owners subsequently bought their property back from the state. For reasons we don't know, the phone company did not. Perhaps because the area that they owned is not very developable anyway. And for what it's worth, it works out very well because the applicant was not planning to use any of that land. They were always planning to keep any use of the land constrained within the area that had been used for many decades. But we did want to bring that to your attention. It's another little lesson on why you always get title insurance and a current survey. Let me back up one moment. I'm cognizant that Mr. Matsuno was not at the January 21st meeting, so I thought I would run through all of this. I hope the rest of you don't mind the repeated information, but I want to make sure you had the background. The property is zoned light industrial, and it's a total of 8.5 acres when you remove the 4 acres that the state owns. Just showing the area from the county GIS records. And we had accessed historical aerial photographs to be able to demonstrate and frankly understand how long the property has been used and looked over the years. And we were amazed at how similar it has looked literally for 40 or 50 years. It was zoned light industrial in the early 70s. So, and again, it's been owned by the phone company for at least the last several decades. And as you can see, particularly in the image on the left from 1990, the phone company has used that area for storage of its materials in the back area here for many, many years, and then has used it to store their fleet vehicles and bucket trucks and things like that as well. We have a number of existing conditions photographs. Most of them are taken using Google Street View. This one was actually taken just a few weeks ago, just after the most recent snowstorm, so that we could provide you a rendering from this area, which I'll show you in a moment. But this shows the fairly poor conditions of the existing site with regard to plantings and quality of the entrance corridor treatment. Particularly the building there, which includes essentially no plantings in front, as well as prominently visible mechanical equipment right in the front. And again, the existing fence along the frontage, the rest of the frontage allows clear visibility into the site of the existing vehicles, as well as some of the storage materials in the back. There are a handful of trees there, but they don't do much for screening. This is just another view from a slightly different angle. And this a little further back. And again, you can see the phone company trucks and other equipment, the property. This is from our concept plan, just showing the existing conditions. And as noted, the area in purple is the area that the zoning staff had determined had or qualifies as existing legal non-conforming stored area because it was used as stored area before the requirement for a special use permit was enacted. And so the restriction is that unless that's brought into conformance, using it is very challenging because the ordinance does not allow any expansion of any non-conforming use, even if it's legal. So we're actually okay with bringing that area in the back into conformance. We think that makes sense. This is the concept plan that we brought to you on January 21st. I wanted to show you this again so that when I show you the updated plan, you can appreciate some of the changes that were made. When we put this together, the meeting we had on January 21st was a conceptual meeting because we didn't yet have a updated Alta survey. It was very conceptual at the time. Since then, again, we have the survey, so we're able to make a number of changes that we were planning to make anyway, and that also were based on the feedback that we received from you all on January 21st. It's not advancing. There we go. So here's the revised plan. Let me go to the next page where I get into a little bit more detail. The first sort of bigger picture issues is that we revised the boundaries of the proposed new outdoor storage area, the area in orange, in two ways. One is the cursor no longer seems to be working on the upper screen, but there it is. We pulled this back a little bit so that the staff had suggested we add notes confirming that the existing vegetation in that area would remain. And so we have pulled the boundary of this away from the property line so that it essentially matches up with existing asphalt. So again, the goal has always been not expand beyond the area that the prior owners had used. And then likewise over here, originally there's a fence, there's a chain link fence that runs here, and we were proposing to relocate it slightly. And as shown there, it was still shown there. So we've pulled that back. The fence is now going to stay as it is. So it doesn't make sense to leave that there. That's part of kind of a travel way. Other changes that we've made based on feedback at the last meeting is we added a line here, as staff indicated, that's roughly 50 feet from the fence and roughly 100 feet from the right of way. So that line would provide that no materials taller than 8 feet can be stored in that area. They have to all be further back. And that's the height of the fence that we're proposing. Again, we have the notes about vegetation on site to remain on both sides. We also added this area, and this was in response to the request to bring the area in purple back into conformance. We were able to add some additional shrubbery for screening there to help mitigate views that kind of went straight back into that area. We also updated the planting plan in this area. Originally, it only included trees, and the landscape architects have added a significant amount of shrubbery lower to help screen the stored areas in the back, in the purple area. So we think, yes, there will be a little bit, very small amount of visibility for a very small time, but the vast majority, if not all of the area in the back will be screened. I have a few additional slides I can add. And then likewise, showing that the existing vegetation on the eastern edge of the property will remain. And this is just another view of the updated conceptual plan along that frontage to see the enlargement. Again, those plantings are new, and then this has been supplemented with the shrubs. I mentioned we've added all of this planting along the frontage of the building. It's not necessary as part of the special use permit, because obviously those plantings are not screening the outdoor storage per se, but we thought that it substantially improved the conditions along the frontage regardless. So we wanted to go ahead and do that wherever we could. With regard to the concerns that staff has for visibility of the back area in purple from sort of this short view from the back, a couple things. One, as you can see, we've measured it's about 305 feet back from the edge of the right of way or the property line. It's also 10 feet lower in elevation. So we think any material that's stored back there at that distance and with regard to that change in elevation is not likely to be visible other than perhaps a de minimis amount, especially given the new lower shrubbery screening we have here and the new screening here. Likewise, we think this area will be sufficiently screened by the new plantings. Its distance of 230 feet, and it's about 4 feet lower in elevation. And then this other issue that was brought to our attention, originally the focus was on the question to us, or the comment was, what happens when this HVAC contractor, if and when their property ever redevelops, how do we account for potential new views into the site? Our comment was about, well, they would have to include additional landscaping that the ARB and or the zoning ordinance might require. But our understanding now is that staff continues to have concerns that visibility warrants additional screening. We think probably not, that it's, again, a fair distance away, looking through additional vegetation, some of which is on site, some is on the HVAC company parcel, but that it will sufficiently screen given everything else kind of going on at this location. We really tried to look at big picture in terms of where do we have a lot of room and flexibility to make significant impactful changes. We tried to really go over and above in those areas as much as possible. And we think this is a good example. We had a lot of room along the Rio frontage with the addition of a berm for planting and a pretty heavy planting plan and a new fence to really help screen those materials that are closer to the road and ensure that taller materials will not be within 50 feet of the fence or 100 feet of the right of way. This is just an aerial view showing the conceptual landscaping. So again, to the extent the concern is kind of this area in the back, it's so far away, it's 10 feet lower in elevation. And we contend that all of the new improvements to the area will make far more of an positively impactful difference that any minor, short, brief visibility of stored materials in the back won't have any impact on the entrance corridor. So we welcome your feedback on that. Then again, we have some renderings I'll run through quickly. We know you would never approve mechanical equipment on the front like this. So our plan proposes to screen those as much as possible with new plantings. Again, none of these plantings are really necessary for screening the outdoor storage of materials, but we think it makes quite an improvement in the conditions along the frontage. And this is a rendering showing how that could look, showing the mechanical equipment screened. This is the fence proposed for along Rio. And then next we have a number of renderings showing how the new planting plan will improve substantially the views along the entrance corridor. So this is the first one looking northeast. And by comparison, quite a significant improvement. Likewise, the frontage looking northwest, we have two views. This is the first one with those plantings we showed you. And then the second one, we're just showing them side by side. And then this is the new image that we did not have on January 21st. This viewpoint or vantage point with the new row of shrubbery, new trees in that area, new shrubs and trees along this frontage. And most of the time there will be some employee cars in the parking lot, certainly, not as many as may have been there before when the phone company was there. But we think that the improvement with the plantings will sufficiently address any visibility there. Again, the before and after. I think that's the end. Oh, we do have a few photos, again, for Mr. Matsuno in particular, showing some representation of the types of materials that Ferguson Waterworks stores. And just for clarification, this is for a waterworks site, not a Ferguson plumbing site. So it's not plumbing contractors or members of the public who come to buy here, just wholesale customers buying pipes and fire hydrants and more pipes, things like that, and other materials that are stored there. Thank you.
All right.
I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks for the presentation. I guess we'll start with Frank Stoner if you have any questions.
Hi, thanks. I don't have any questions. Really nice proposal. I appreciate the additional plantings you guys have added. I think it looked good.
Thanks. Dade?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. No questions.
Okay, thank you.
Frank Hancock?
Thanks. I don't have any questions either.
Tara?
Thank you for the presentation. It's very clear. I appreciate the background.
Valerie, I'm sorry. It's not because I don't care, but
I know.
I don't have any questions.
No questions
either.
is a good thing in my book, so no worries.
Are there any members of the public that would like to make a comment?
Yes, sir.
All right, in that case, the ARB will now go into discussion. I guess we'll start with Tara.
Yes, I think that the landscape plan as presented represents huge improvement over what's currently there. So I do appreciate the applicant's work to present a thoughtful landscape solution along the entrance corridor. With respect to the two questions for our discussion about shrubs on the western edge of the storage area and on the eastern edge, I think for the western edge, I think something might be appropriate because I would prefer that the responsibility of screening the storage area would lie with the applicant who's doing the storing. And so in the case that the adjacent parcel gets redeveloped, I think it would be appropriate for some form of screening to be provided on that side. It's a long, property line, and so I don't believe that it's necessary that that whole area be screened. But I could imagine, for instance, up to that 50-foot buffer line, that some continuation of the landscaping wraps around the corner to screen a portion of that. I think that that would be an appropriate response. And then as far as the screening on the eastern side, I had a look at the street view, and I think it's tricky because that extent that staff had proposed, that additional landscaping, is basically like at the same depth of the building. And so I think that I do believe that there are views from that corridor into the sort of the blue region towards the rear of the site that are meaningfully visible, but I don't know if screening that portion along the edge of the parking lot only with shrubbery would necessarily meet. The concern I would have is more around taller objects in the rear of the blue area of the site that might be visible. And so I wonder if, rather than considering just a line of shrubs, that maybe just in that area where the alongside the path where the was previously proposed as being partly storage area, that like a tree or two in that area would kind of provide the necessary height in order to screen taller objects in that further area, but not require, adjusting the fence location of the parking spaces with a line of shrubbery. I think that that would be something that kind of speaks to staff and my concern, but it's hopefully less is just more feasible and less onerous than and more effective than a line of shrubbery. So those are my initial thoughts on those two questions. But overall, I think it's a great landscape plan, and I appreciate the applicant's work to make this a conforming and reasonable addition to the entrance corridor and improvement.
All right, thanks. Frank Hancock?
Sure. Yeah, I agree with Taro, especially that big picture, this is a vast improvement from what's there now. I do think when you look at this, it's not a new building. It's not a building addition. I mean, it's largely like a paperwork exercise, and we're getting a full frontage landscape that's, berm, varied plantings, nice fence. So I appreciate all that. I think of the two, maybe the western property line, I agree that is kind of visible there, just given the nature of those existing vegetation. But I don't think it needs to go far. I think it's really just a glimpse, and maybe some additional landscaping like turns that corner. But yeah.
All right, thanks. Dade?
Great. Yeah, like Frank and Taro, continue to think this is a great proposal and improvement to the frontage. Appreciate with staff's thinking about the contingency of if the adjacent site is developed and how other views might develop. I think Taro makes a reasonable proposal of perhaps continuing the landscape screening to that 50-foot line at the western boundary. And I appreciate Taro also suggesting that maybe one or two trees along that fence line might go a very long way to help mitigate potential views without needing the full extent in the staff report. Yeah, appreciate the proposal.
All right, thanks. Frank?
Oh, I guess I have a question first of all, and it's sort of hypothetical, but if we're talking about a landscaping on a property line that's not adjacent to the corridor, and we're really concerned about visibility from an adjoining property, is that within the purview of the ARB?
I didn't understand the issue to be the view from the adjacent property. It was the view from the corridor across that property and into the subject property.
Yeah, that's why I said this, it's somewhat a hypothetical question that came to mind when we started the conversation. So it doesn't necessarily apply here, but I was
It's the-
curious.
The view from the corridor is what matters.
View from the corridor is the only thing that, okay. I share the perspective of my other board members. I think it's a huge improvement. Couple trees on the sort of eastern edge where you've got the line of shrubs now, I agree, might be nice. I do think the storage is far enough away from the corridor that it's not, it might technically be visible if you stopped your car, but I think for a traveling vehicle, it's probably not an issue, so I wouldn't require it. And on the other side, we're looking, again, the story, maybe turn the corner to your point. But I think the vast majority of that storage is gonna be behind the view corridor, coming up hydraulic, going westbound, I guess. So those are my, thanks.
Thanks. And I agree with what's been said. I think in general, it's a vast improvement. I do think that kind of turning the corner and adding a couple trees on the other side, would improve it. So, but I think generally it's a big improvement. So if we could take a look at the,
So this recommendation, the way we've recommended the motion is to make the following recommendations on the application, and there are three groups of items here. The first being revisions to the concept plan prior to planning commission review. The second group is the conditions on the special use permit, and then the third group is the list of items to be resolved with the final site plan. And for the first group, revisions to the concept plan, based on the conversation, I've edited that to say, number one, revise the concept plan to provide screening shrubs along the western side of the storage area for the first 50 feet from the Rio property line. And number two, provide trees in the planting area east of the employee parking lot entrance, but I'm not sure I've got that direction right.
right, I guess, to see on this first section if anybody has any edits to the edits.
My suggestion on the trees on item 2 was on the, it's hard to describe exactly, but I guess on the building side of the fence in the east parking area. Or on the west side of the of the easternmost parking lot. Maybe we can point. My concern was more closer to the gate, like in that area.
This area?
Yeah, because my thought was just the shrubbery along the edge of that parking lot is basically the same as the building. Like I don't think it'll have as much of an impact in screening it's more in that region that I was concerned with, and I thought a tree or two in that region would be do a better job of screening anything in the blue region than it would.
I'm gonna move my cursor and you tell me to stop when you think it's, when you're.
Yeah, stop.
Okay.
That like there to the south is kind of what I was imagining.
So in this area,
Yes.
Corner of the.
along this fence line?
Yes, I was concerned about the visibility of the equipment beyond. Do other members have other thoughts?
Can we get feedback from the applicant on the feasibility of this?
It's all asphalt, isn't it?
Is it not
Not a
asphalt on the?
storage.
You want-
Yeah,
Yeah, that area, it's really part of an old sidewalk. It's a little bit overgrown. It's sidewalk and asphalt essentially. So we were trying to avoid tearing up too much. We thought the new, my cursor, the new plantings that go across that old travelway, we thought would be most effective in screening. If the concern remains about the back corner in purple, what we'd rather do is just remove that corner from the storage area and not put fencing. We're just concerned that plantings in that area are just not going to survive. The parking lot goes right up, or parking spaces go right up against the fence. So there's no room for new plantings on the parking lot side of the fence. So it would all have to be in that area where it's old pavement and sidewalk. And I don't think it's going to be as effective, or it's maybe just, we don't think that area will be used all that much for storage. So if that helps address the concern, we could just have that line kind of where the cursor is, just continue straight up page, yes. And kind of remove that corner area in purple from the purple. That would be our preference.
Seeing as I raised the concern, I think that seems like an appropriate solution. From the corridor, I just noticed that there is a rear portion that is rather visible from the corridor, but my thought was that originally proposed shrubbery would be disrupting the parking lot and not adding a ton of value, seeing as the existing area, it marked in yellow, is not what I thought, just a green area with a sidewalk. I think it would be appropriate to adjust the boundary line of the storage area in the rear to address that concern.
Thank you.
Margaret, could you scroll up so we can see the frontage there?
We can see what?
See the frontage on hydraulic. So Tara, are you talking about you think the shrubs on the east side of the entrance there? Is that what you're referring to?
No, I think that's fine. I just
Oh.
noticed when I was in the street view, looking at that corner, there's a whole portion of the rear of that storage area that's kind of visible from the entrance corridor. But it's not exactly addressed by planting along that edge or um,
300 feet, 230 feet?
305 feet to the
305 feet.
closest purple area and 10 feet lower in elevation. But it would be easier for the applicants to just remove that than to try to tear up the pavement area further and add screening for that.
Yeah. I wouldn't want. I mean, it's existing asphalt. It's already fenced in. I don't know, and to the point of how far away it is from the corridor. I don't know, this one I just have to think about globally of like such an improvement. And it's a retrofit of an existing building. We're not evaluating any new architecture. Seems kind of onerous to like be adding a lot of things. I don't know.
I tend to agree. I just, yeah, I think.
All right, well, maybe if we go back to the motion, we can.
I've adjusted number 2 to, based on the most recent conversation, eliminate the eastern corner of the storage area shown in purple as identified in the meeting.
That seem reasonable to everybody, or?
I don't think it's necessary. And it's 300 feet off the, thinking about storage area, 10 feet down and 300 feet off the corridor, and we're gonna. Over that?
Yeah,
Personally, I tend to agree too. I mean,
I object to number 2. I think we could work on number 1. I do feel like that corner
Yeah,
gonna
I'm
be
okay with that.
visible. I mean, Tar, to your point, if that was a green area that was easily converted or, some point, where does it stop? I mean, because there's lots of things that aren't compliant of like, given that it's a retrofit and they're,
Well, I think given the types of materials, like for instance, they're not storing like 40 feet high of pipes. You know, that like seeing as the purple area is below visible grade, that it doesn't seem likely that they'd be storing more than 10 feet high of material.
Right.
You know, my concern would be more, I think, if you had like like a storage of multiple boom trucks in the back, right?
Yeah.
That would be pretty visible from that portion of the corridor. I can see that, you know, given the nature of storage that's happening there, that number 2 is not likely to have a significant impact, so I'm fine removing it.
all right, so generally, are we okay if we just struck item 2?
yes.
I've edited the wording of number 1. I think this more accurately represents what you were talking about. Revise the concept plan to provide screening shrubs along the western side of the storage area to turn the corner from the front back to the red dashed line as shown on the concept plan.
That wording looks good to me. Does anybody?
Seems accurate. Discussion.
All right, in that case. Move down.
The next group is the conditions for the special use permit.
And I think, yeah, these are conditions that we talked about last time. so.
These are, most of it is, I think, just as it was. Number 1 has been revised to have standard wording referencing the concept plan and to mention the style of the fence.
Number 2 was updated to match what they showed in the concept plan.
right,
at
yeah.
50 feet.
Does anybody have any concerns about that second section?
No.
No.
All right, then we move to the last paragraph.
And these are all the same as with the previous review.
All right, if anybody has any tweaks, speak now. No, or forever hold your tweaks. All right, does anybody want to make a motion?
I'll move to make the following recommendations on ARB 2024-71/SP 2024-25, 400 West Route Road, as listed in the staff memo, amended as follows. Item 1, add to turn the corner from the front to the red dashed line as shown on the concept plan, and strike item 2.
Second.
We could put that to a vote.
Mr. Vanderwerf,
Aye.
Mr. Mitsuno,
Aye.
Mr. Stoner,
Aye.
Mr. Hancock,
Aye.
Mr. Henningsen.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. So we will move on to other business, first of which is approval of the February 17th, 2025 minutes. So I'll move to approve them if.
I
can
can't
get
wait
a
to second.
I'll second.
Stoner second, okay. Mr. Henningsen,
Aye.
Mr. Hancock,
Aye.
Mr. Stoner,
Aye.
Mr. Mitsuno,
Aye.
Mr. Vanderwerf.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, does any board members or staff have any additional items?
I have one quick question for everyone. Do you have a preference in how you would like to receive your quorum check emails? What would be best to get responses back?
Do you feel you haven't been receiving adequate responses?
Are we gonna get shamed? Do you have like?
In other words.
Percent return.
Please. Frank respond 25%.
Whether it comes from you, Carolyn, or Chris, it all works the same for me.
Would you prefer a separate email, like separate from the one that says, here's the link to the information for the upcoming meeting? Does it get lost in that? Prefer to have it together? It's just,
Do you want to just make that a standard part of distributing materials? Like,
Yeah,
when you receive them, you acknowledge and say if you will or won't attend? Just-
Yeah.
that's
I
okay.
like that.
great.
Thank you.
So we'll
for
just
the-
know that we're always expected to advise on our attendance when we, and confirm receipt of the materials.
Yes, please.
Yeah, did they, I felt like when I joined the board a couple years ago, I guess, or when I did, that they were all, I got the impression that they were more when there was a question as to whether we would all be there. The quorum checks, but have they been coming more frequently, or have we had more
We've just,
schedule issues or?
we do it more regularly now. We do it for every meeting just to make sure, because we've just found that things change along the way and we want to be sure.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
If it-
Thank you.
That way it's just, you don't have to send out a separate email. And
Great.
so speaking of quorums, the next ARB meeting is scheduled for Monday, March 17th, 2025. I know at this point I will not be able to attend that one, so
Okay.
is there any other slackers who?
I currently expect to attend, so.
I
Right.
plan to attend.
Okay, right now, we don't have any regular review items for that agenda. I would like to wait about a week and see if anything unusual pops up that we need to take care of before canceling the meeting, if that's okay with you all.
Perfect.
Great. All right, well, in that case, this meeting is adjourned until our next meeting, possibly on March 17th or possibly sometime in April. And by my watch, it is 2:33. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.